HR workers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen an employee screwed over by the company? I worked for an oil company and lived through mass redundancies when the oil went belly up. They sent out a list of which positions were being made redundant, with numbers for how many people currently held that role and how many they were cutting it to. So if it said buyers current 4, consultation 3, you knew that if you were a buyer, you'd be under scrutiny and 25% of your team would be gone soon. I sat at my desk and opened the email. Looked for my position, no redundancy for me. The girl next to me opened hers and saw her position, current 1, consultation E. That's how she learned she'd lost her job. Story 2. Not in HR, but I can think of 2 examples. There was a fire drill, and upon returning it was discovered that not everybody returned. Apparently it was a literal fire drill, where some people were told that they had been let go and this was their way of having them leave. The other example is my dad, who had been with a huge multinational company that tried to fire him a week or so before his 30-year work anniversary. Fortunately for him, the manager forgot to give him the necessary paperwork on time, and he was fired but made it to the 30-year mark, which has extremely heavy implications on pension and retirement. Story 3. In 2008, my company had a riff of 100 or so people. The day it happened was just terrible. I walked into a conference room and found the HR guy crying in the dark. 30 days later, they let him go, 2008. Sucked. Story 4. I'm just an it guy, so I don't always know the whole story, but it feels bad locking someone's account on their PC and having them find out that way. Then, of course, moments later, an HR person shows up in their office. Story 5. We had rifts back in '08. They started in February in the Midwest. One gal was escorted out of the secure area, told she was gone and to leave the building. She was okay with being rifed, however. It's February in the Midwest and it's cold outside. All her stuff was inside the secure area and they wouldn't allow her to back in. They wouldn't get her stuff for her. She had to stand out in 20-degree weather until someone she knew would call a buddy to get her hat, coat, purse, car keys. Story 6. Obligatory, not an HR worker, but my college roommate was a temp in an HR office for college credit. She came home one night absolutely disheveled, makeup smeared, heels in hand, just rough. In a nutshell, her supervisor made her participate in firing a woman for creating a hostile work environment. Seems cut and dry, right? Turns out the hostility was directed at a man the woman accused of abuse her daughter. The woman obviously went bat-crap crazy, crying, begging to keep her job, the works. Told my roommate the entire story about how she dated the guy for years. Thought he was great, but now her daughter had some kind of STD that the guy had given to both of them. Naturally, the mom threatened to loss the guy. The HR supervisor wasn't having it. Had security escort the woman out. My roommate asked the supervisor if she thought the mom was telling the truth. The supervisor, cold as ice. Probably. We hire some really suspicious people. She shouldn't have left her daughter alone. That broke something in my roommate, and she dropped her business program 3.5 years in. I think she graduated with a degree in biology or something 2 years later. Story 7. Not HR, but I was forced out of a job in a crafty way and want to share. I moved to another state and got a job at an alternative school for kids who had been kicked out of public school for emotional and behavioral issues. The company spent a few hundred hours training me, and I learned a lot more on the job. It was difficult at times, but I enjoyed the work and the people I worked with. After a few months, I felt comfortable in my role. Then, for some reason still unknown to me, the bosses wanted me gone. I was called into a meeting with 2 supervisors who said that we were now overstaffed, lie, we had 3 vacancies, and that I had an exciting opportunity to move to another program. They wanted to move me to our sister program where you work one-on-one in a public school, which can suck if you have a tough kid. And in that program, they wanted me to be a sub-floater, so I could get a text at 5 a.m. telling me I had to go to a school an hour away to work with an emotionally unstable kid I've never met before. So I thought about it the next day and told my supervisor that I wanted to stay where I was, but that I would be flexible and go to the other program for a few months if they needed me there, or be a permanent one-on-one with a kid, just not a permanent floater. I didn't hear anything for a week, and then get called into a meeting with both supervisors and the head director. The head director says that the other program would be better for my professional development, bullcrap, and then asks me to tell her 3 of my professional goals that I'm working on, clearly trying to catch me off guard. I make up something and then tell her my reasons for wanting to stay. I don't hear anything for a couple weeks, but the bosses are crafty and begin sending me emails for any mistakes I make that could easily have been said in person. For example, another staff and I were dealing with an escalated kid who had already bit me and I was tapping my foot while watching him. The director came up behind me, loudly said, "You need to stop doing that," in front of the kid. Then she had one of my supervisors write me an email the next day telling me I had to be conscious of tapping my foot or drumming my fingers, which is true but doesn't require an email. Then I get called into another meeting with the director and 2 supervisors, who tell me that I am getting moved to the other program. I gave my 2 weeks notice on the spot, which made my coworkers think I was a badass, but didn't help the fact that I needed a new job. My director then still forced me to go to the other program for my last 2 weeks. So I didn't get the goodbye ceremony or anything at the alternative school and could do very little at the other program since they knew I wouldn't be there long. I ended up getting a job at a preschool with a much better boss, but it still frustrates me to think about the whole experience. Story 8. I had a friend years ago, and she worked security at First Union Bank's Maynard campus. She told me the way they let people go is they would come to badge in through the door and their card would not work. Out came HR and security, where they would escort the person to their desk to get their things and then walked right out the door. She told me about 3 weeks after this started, one Saturday night around 5 p.m., their ATM system crashed and took them about all night to recover. She told me she thinks someone left them a going-away gift. Story 9. I was the screwed-over employee here. I'm colorblind. My boss gave me a work task that was color-coded in a way that I couldn't see, based on color coding of spreadsheet cells, where each color had a specific meaning and I couldn't distinguish all of them. When I told my boss about this, she decided to write me up for it, under the assumption I was lying to get out of work. I went straight to HR with a copy of the write-up. The rep told me that there was exactly one way I could get the write-up off my record. I could use our tuition reimbursement program to go take a remedial art class at the local community college, so that you can finally learn your colors, she said. That's when I found out that colorblindness isn't protected under the ADA. This was right about the same time that I stayed late one day to cover for a coworker who ran out of insulin in her pump. I stayed about 45 minutes while she went home, got her refill, and came back. The next day, I was written up for the unauthorized overtime. Another coworker went into the same HR rep to see if she could put her son on her insurance. She was told that no, she couldn't do that since her son lived in Hawaii, and Hawaii isn't part of the United States. I decided about that time it just wasn't worth staying at that company. Story 10. I worked almost 100% on one of the major projects at my company. It was one of only a couple whales that was keeping the lights on. This was during the major oil crash around 2014 or so. The project manager booked a long vacation way in advance, and the client decided at the last minute that all the work needed to be revisited, not by our fault, just compliance with a new regulatory procedure. This was actually great news because it gave a lot of people work to do, which was pleasantly surprising news when layoffs are happening weekly, so we could not say no. A more senior coworker stepped up and took over. Everything went great, and we got the deadline on time, but it took a lot of overtime on their part. They really came through. I and other coworkers mentioned them by name during performance reviews to commend them. They were laid off a couple weeks later. It was not announced. They stopped informing the staff of layoffs because apparently it was hurting morale. I was already planning on leaving to go to grad school, but I could have changed my mind until that point. I pretty just mentally checked out, ignored everyone, and counted down the days until I left. Just remember that if you work for a huge company, you owe them absolutely nothing beyond your scheduled hours. The people deciding your fate could be entire tiers above whatever low-level manager you answer to, and you will probably never see their face or even know their name. You may get dropped on an impulse to make their spreadsheet numbers look better for their next meeting. Story 11. Allow me to post a happy story involving layoffs and HR, but first, a little background. Where I live, employers could give out temporary contracts for a total of 3 years. After that, they had to let you go or offer you a permanent contract. Work somewhere for 3 years and a single second issue permanent contract. This girl was on her 3rd year. With all signs pointing towards a permanent contract, her evaluations were through the roof. She was one of the more productive workers in the department. Good rapport with customers. Coworkers liked her, and she loved working there. It should have been a done deal. However, 2 months before she hits 3 years, the company announces a downsizing. As part of this downsizing, all temporary workers will not have their contracts renewed or made permanent. Department head tries to argue with HR, citing everything I mentioned above, but they can't do anything. Downsizing like this is part of labor law as well as the CBA, and they literally cannot make exceptions, but they can offer her transition help, i.e. helping her find a new job. Girl doesn't want to do, but is convinced by the department head to in any way, so she brings her CV and the proof of all the training she's had and meets up with the HR rep. HR rep stops at one of her internships she did right before she came to her current job, asks her a lot of questions about it. Then he asks her a lot of questions about how long she's been working at the company. Then he steps out for a good 10 minutes before returning with the head of the HR department. They ask her again to confirm her employment history. Turns out the company she interned at was taken over roughly a year before by the company she now worked for. Also, internships count as work experience, and when the takeover was finalized, the payroll was transferred on a one-to-one basis, including past experience. So officially, her employment with our company was not 2 years, 11 months, but 3 years, 2 months. As a result, her previously temporary contract was now permanent by law, and she wasn't laid off. Story 12. Sears Canada. Going through bankruptcy, many employees were laid off with no severance while the executives were getting six-figure bonuses. Those bonuses could have covered many employees' severance. Story 13. You know what's ducked? Getting walked out by security in the middle of your shift because you got fired over something small, petty, and unimportant. Let us finish our goddamn shift. Just be like, hey, drop by HR after work. Maybe give us a phone call. We already showed up for work. Let's get paid for that last day instead of driving for nothing. Give us the ability to act with dignity and honor. You strip that, what's left? It's overly dramatic and silly as duck to walk people out with the corporate cop treating them like a criminal. Yeah, I know some people explode or do something crafty when they get fired, but seriously, grow a pair of balls and face it as a fact of life that maybe 1 in 1,000 employees will have a crap storm. No need to treat the other 999 like common criminals. God, even if people are just peacefully laid off, they can still get walked out like criminals who need a security escort because they've done some bad crap. Would you like a pair of handcuffs and a billy club to complete the ensemble? If you treat people that crafty, they aren't going to respect the company. Think about that. What do people do when they don't respect the company? They don't work as hard, do they? They don't stick around either. They talk. Now everybody thinks the job is crap. Your own policies are self-defeating. Treat people with a little dignity. Source. Worked for HP, subcontracted by Adecco, aka Gestapo. Saw some stupid crap in my day. Once a guy was fired for taking a Kleenex from a cubicle to blow his nose. Somebody complained to HR, so HR just fired one of the temp workers for it. Fired? Kleenex. What is this? Dubai? Sharia law? Corporate behavior is ducked, and 99% of it is because people who work HR are evil mother duckers with no soul or capacity to understand or even work out a situation. HR is supposed to be problem solvers, but they don't solve problems. They are the problem most of the time. Story 14. I used to work in a warehouse, and one time an employee got seriously injured. His arm and leg were seriously ducked up. This guy worked out a lot, so management pulled him into the office and began to speak to him. So you hurt your arm at the gym and now want to blame us? A pallet of heavy things literally tumbled over near him. If he didn't move right away, he could have easily gotten crushed. Management thought it was a scam. Do you know what insurance fraud is? Tell us the truth. We know everything. You can't lie to us. The guy was stunned. He wanted to use his health insurance, but the management wasn't hearing it. This continued for some time, a few hours at least. I guess someone overheard because 3 guys from the union showed up pissed as hell. Really pissed. There was screaming, shouting, and then one mentioned that perhaps we should get the Department of Labor and the insurance company involved. I guess that was enough to convince him. He let the employee use his insurance, and things went on for a while. Apparently, this guy had a habit of doing this to everyone who was injured. Injury happens. A day later, etc. He literally accused someone of working with a broken arm for 2 weeks before going to the hospital. I think someone either reported him or the union stepped in because he's disappeared. Story 15. I worked for a company on contract. In HR, if you believe it. Was a crappy company. So 6 weeks before the contract ended, I went to the boss and said that I was going to leave at the end of my contract. For the next 6 weeks, I was persona non grata in the HR department. I was removed from their group email list. I wasn't told about meetings. They went on 2-day training outside the office, and I wasn't told. I arrived at work to an empty HR department for 2 days, etc., etc. On my last day, I was saying goodbye to people around the office, and my boss comes down and demands that I come to a meeting and walks away. After 6 weeks of basically no contact, I was wondering why. Someone in another department said that they had planned a goodbye party for me. They treated me like crap for 6 weeks and then bought a gift, cake, balloons, etc. I said, F that, snuck up to my desk, got my coat, left the building and drove away. Apparently, they sat there for an hour paging me throughout the building before they realized that I had left. Good thing was, I didn't need them for a reference as a friend of mine owned his own company and gave me one saying I had worked there for the year. Story 16. A colleague of mine was flown from his office in the field to headquarters under the pretense of a leadership meeting and fired immediately once he arrived. He was on a plane back home 2 hours later. The boss didn't feel like traveling. Story 17. 1. Owner-founder sells the company to a big corporation, makes a huge profit and ducks off to the tropics. 2. New management starts to fire people over 100. The first 6 months. 3. New management then makes the place so miserable, people start losing it and quitting. The second 6 months. On 4, place gets so bad, employees threaten to unionize. Company says if they do, all jobs will be terminated and services exported to India. Worst crap I've ever seen. Duck big corporations. Story 18. Not HR, but my favorite HR story over the years. Short story long. I've been in it for over 20 years, and this was one of my earlier experiences. From start to finish, this story took place over 4 years. When I got hired, it was about 250 employees across 4 states. Got hired on for a support position for Exalia's HR. 2 days later, 1 of 2 internal staff left. Got asked to fill that position. Renegotiated my pay to about 1.5x my prior pay rate, but salaried. Worked for about another year when my boss left. They hired a replacement, with me having to train her. She lasted 2 weeks before she left. They looked for about 2 months before I was given the position, with another raise to 2x my original pay rate, reporting to the CEO. For the IT folk, this was in the era when you could still be a one-man show for it. Fast forward another year or so, I was supporting a project that was making a metric crap ton of cash. The company decided it'd be better if I moved to that project full-time and for them to bring in a replacement for me. They were making money hand over fist. I basically made the company what they paid me yearly in 1 week. Hadn't had a raise for about a year at this point. End of year review comes around and no raise. Turns out the CIO I reported to was pissed my pay had climbed so much in a relatively short time, regardless of my role. So still having full access to everything as a backup for my replacement. I started looking around. The directories were pretty simple. While I realized that this wasn't the proper way to go about it, every single ducking W-2 employee got a raise. I didn't open the actual paperwork. The directory structure showed it all. I had gone from an internal cost to making them money. Why the duck didn't I get at least a cost of living raise? I Karened to a coworker that I trusted, which came back to bite me. About a month later, I got the call to sit down with the CEO and HR. CEO sits me down with HR and asks me if it's true. I own up and explain that I was pretty pissed that I went from being a coast to making them a gang of cash and was wondering why I didn't get a raise. His response, I didn't get a raise this year. My response was February 001 raise folder. His eyes immediately hit the desk. I can still hear the smack of the HR girl's hand hitting her mouth to stifle the laugh. Story 19. Not HR, but there was this guy who came to work for us about a year ago. This is hard manual labor, and the guy had quit slinging dope on the street to come make an honest living to support his family. He was having trouble dealing with it at first, but he adjusted and ended up being one of the hardest workers on the floor, always working those 12-hour shifts, staying busy that whole time. Anyway, he works with us for a good long while before his 19-year-old daughter dies suddenly in her sleep. He, of course, gets a few days off. They probably would have given him more time, but he really couldn't afford to miss any work. Dude held it together so damn well while he was at work, man. You could tell for sure he was going through some crap, but he stayed busy still. Well, that next week, I guess he decided he needed a little more time off, but he didn't call out and stayed home for 2 days. After returning from those 2 days, he was immediately escorted out of the building and fired. Story 20, not HR. Happened to me. Went in for end-of-year review and was ambushed by HR VP, company president, and 2 VPs, all of whom proceeded to tell me in great detail for about an hour how much I sucked and how much all my coworkers thought I sucked. They had stories from each colleague, small company, that claimed happened over the course of the year. I was never informed about any of them, nor given a chance to defend myself. It was absolutely humiliating, and I sat there crying through it. Was told to go home for the day, come back tomorrow, and at some point over the next couple of weeks, I would be told my last day. I left, called my parents crying, decided to clean myself up, and returned to the office an hour later like nothing had happened. I kept showing up day and after day while reaching out to my professional network and also slowly cleaning our office and cleaning up files. For the entire month of January, HR finally pulled me into office early February and said, last day, leave and make arrangements to come back to clean out office, clean up files, and turn in key. My response left them dumbstruck. Office is cleaned out, all files uploaded to shared drive, and I'll give you a flash drive. Here's my key. Then I skipped out of the office, spent the rest of the week playing tourist at museums, then got busy on a new career in life that continues to be more amazing than I ever thought possible. Story 21. My Fortune 500 company was going through downsizing years back. Everyone knew their turn could be coming, so it wasn't the best of environments. One woman who had been with the company for 20 years was applying for jobs just to see what was out there, but really wanted to stay with current company. She ended up getting an offer elsewhere. So she approached our manager at the time and told him the situation and asked for advice. Boss basically told her nothing is on the horizon, but do what is best for her. So she turns her notice in. The very next day, Riffs announced entire department being let go, except the manager. Everyone gets a severance package, except for Lady, who put notice in the day prior. She lost 40 weeks of pay, 2 per year worked. Boss knew the Riffs were coming. He could have advised her to wait a day in a roundabout way. Duck you, Derek. On the bright side, she had a new job right away, while the rest of us took some time off and competed for the same open jobs in the area. Story 22. Not HR, but I think the way I was fired by my last company was pretty crafty. I worked in marketing for a small company. The company was having problems, and there were crazy internal power struggles, which led to my firing. Basically, crap rolls downhill. Boss wasn't meeting sales goals because the salespeople they hired and were buddies with couldn't sell water to someone dying of thirst and needed someone to blame. I went to the Christmas party and had the next 2 days off. The second day I had off, I got a generic email saying my services were no longer needed. The other 2 people in my department got the same email. Turns out everyone else at the party, about 20 people, knew me, and one of the other people, my supervisor, were going to get fired. The company's HR person, real professional, had told a couple people we were going to get fired, and word spread. The third person who got fired was lined up to get my supervisor's job, but got drunk at the party and told the boss it was a mistake to fire us, so she ended up getting fired too. Looking back, not only was it crafty to fire us a week before Christmas, but also crafty to put us in a room of our coworkers, who all knew we were about to get fired. Story 23. I wasn't in HR, but I was a manager of Target Canada and witnessed the cruelest thing ever while I was there. My department was the Starbucks, and Target had a policy that no expired food would donate, taken home, etc. Any breach of this would be considered stealing. Most of my employees were like 16, 18 years old, and one of them in particular was a pretty bad apple. She convinced most of the team that they could get away with pulling extra food out of the freezer, letting it expire, and then taking it home. Target's system for monitoring this kind of thing was pretty crafty, and I had no way to count or keep track of what was being pulled or thrown. 6 out of 8 of the people on my team were involved in this, and they all got fired the moment that loss prevention finished their investigation. That left me with 2 employees who were not a part of the scheme at all. My store was the second busiest Starbucks within Targets across Canada, and myself and the 2 girls. 2 girls were absolutely drowning. They worked their asses off for me, up to 50, 60 hours a week, while I tried to frantically hire new people and spoke directly with HR and my upper management about ensuring that the 2 girls I had were safe from being terminated. They assured me that they were. After almost a month of hell, I got a new team. HR came to me and told me they'd be letting the other 2 girls go, and that if I spoke about it to them, they'd let me go too. They figured the girls knew what was going on with the others and chose not to say anything, leaving them just as bad as the rest. It literally killed me from the inside. I had to say nothing, knowing that these girls were working their asses off to help this company and to help me. 2 days later, they were escorted out like criminals with a termination left on their employment record. I needed my job, so I stood by, but I ducking hated that company so much going forward. I'm glad it failed, even though I had put so much of myself into it. Story 24. I was working as an HR rep for a company. While I was there, one of the department managers was moved to a different location to take on different responsibilities, and this really upset his all-female team, Relevant, as they had all been working for him for a while and had grown close. When they brought in a new guy to replace him, the team immediately decided that they didn't like the new manager. The guy was fantastic at his job, and the team's output increased greatly, but they just didn't like him. Members of the team would come to me often to complain about things, but the complaints didn't hold any substance. Things like hating his corny jokes, etc. I documented every complaint, but essentially told the employees that he wasn't doing anything wrong, and they would just have to learn to work with him. I left for a new job shortly afterwards, and when I checked in with my old boss to see how things were going, she told me that corporate had decided to get rid of this manager. The reason being that the team knew the company had a zero-tolerance policy on harassment, and figured that if enough of them told the same story, it would be his word against theirs. He would put his hands in his pockets when he walked around. Eventually, the team started using this. They started suggesting to corporate that he could easily be masturbating with his hands in his pockets and said that they felt harassed. The plan worked. The guy was suspended, investigated, and let go within the same week. Basically, investigations are only as good as the time that HR wants to put into them. It's usually a he said, she said situation. Story 25. Oh, Oldcastle. Again, not HR, but was physically attacked by a female subordinate, I am male, while taking a short break in my vehicle. She opened my car door, violently grabbed my arm, and pulled me out of my vehicle. After returning to work following medical leave related to the incident, I returned to find the employee still working for the company. To make it worse, our desks are 3 feet apart, the 2 of us confined to a room together. Let HR know this was unacceptable. Was told that they had dealt with the issue. They had discussed inappropriate touching in the workplace with her. I let them know that a police report had already been filled out and charges had been filed against the woman, but Oldcastle HR refused to budge. I requested to be transferred to a different site as there were several in the area. Request denied. Told them I refused to work in the same room as somebody who physically attacked me. Sorry, you have to. In the end, given 6 months' pay and shown the door after over 3 years' service. The other employee was let go in under a year due to her constant mistakes, rude interactions with our dealer network, and inability to effectively manage her workload. I feel to this day, had the genders been reversed, there would have been a 100% different outcome. Basically, even after the employee admitted to the attack and my medical leave, HR didn't want to admit the incident took place. Story 26. Made an employee come in at 6:30 for the morning rush hour, only to tell her to leave after 10 minutes because they were a bit overstaffed. At least give her 2 hours for her troubles. Story 27. Not an HR guy, but I've seen my former employer do some ducked up crap to employees. One employee hurts themselves on the job, trips on a falls, hurts herself pretty badly, is off work for quite some time, and then the employer decides to retaliate by suddenly getting rid of her position. Seems to be a legal loophole there. She sues for getting hurt because of unsafe condition. Then, a year later, the company suddenly decides they need that particular position again and hires someone. I've seen confidential memos about trying to find a good way to let someone go who got cancer without trying to get sued for it. I found out that the employer was making secret profiles of their employees. Pros and cons of each employee: being married, pro, single, con, being healthy, pro, having poor health, guinea, pro, overweight, con, smoker, financially well off, pro, paycheck to paycheck, all kinds of stuff like that. Employees were just commodities to them. This particular employer shuts down every year for 4 months, and the longtime employees come back. Well, 1 year, management decided to tell all the employees that they would have to reapply for their positions again, and to not expect to get paid their regular salary. It was just an excuse to get rid of people. Most employees took the hint and moved on. Pretty despicable, if you ask me. We lost some quality workers too. They planned on keeping the employees they wanted at their regular pay, and then crafting on the employees they didn't care left by offering them minimum wage. I saw a memo of the CEO boasting to the board members about how he got rid of the thieves and thugs. Story 28. This was at a previous job before I started working in HR. It was a large company, and restructuring layoffs were relatively common every couple of years. They would usually lay off a few people from the same department. So if someone got called into the manager's office and got laid off, everyone was nervously wondering how many there would be and if they would be spared. Well, when my day came, I was number 3. 2 people got laid off before me. When I went into the office, my manager had been crying and was still having a really tough time. She said that she tried to change their minds and that they told her the decision was made. My wife, now she was my GF at the time, worked there in a different department. She told me how it went down after I left. A couple of departments were getting hit really hard because they were outsourcing a lot of work to India. My boss ended up having to lay off her entire team. She was told that she would be joining another department, who was also going through layoffs that day. So she was scrambling to cover the essential items from each of our work, and she was also trying to help cover some work in her new team. She was running all over the place, trying to transition everything to India and make sure that all customer calls were getting answered. She finally got all products turned on overseas at about 6 p.m. Then HR came into her office and laid her off. Pretty ducked up. Story 29. First-hand witness because it was me. Worked at a biotech startup for a year, saved them tons on in-house development of assay reagents, and had nothing but positive feedback. One of my coworkers was let go due to budgetary concerns and was given a very generous severance. About a month later, my father passed away and I took a couple of days. When I come back, I'm asked to stay late for a few days. And then on Tuesday, I'm told that I'm being furloughed until they get a grant approved, but would for sure be brought back on. Lost health insurance, no severance offered, and they had already canceled my ID badge and parking pass. Couldn't get back in to get my wallet and keys and whatnot, during which time my car was towed. Story 30. Obligatory not in HR, but one of my best friends. We worked together in a call center. Place was awful. Well, she got really sick. Life-threateningly sick. She was in the hospital for 9 weeks and then was on disability for a while. She was on FMLA and was keeping the company informed of all doctor's orders. She found out she lost her job when she went to fill a prescription and her insurance was denied. They didn't bother to tell her. They just canceled her insurance. I left shortly before they did that, and it was a good thing, because I would have flipped on HR had I been there. Story 31. Not HR, but I can certainly tell you how Amazon HR screwed me over pretty good. I have worked for the company twice. On the second occasion, years after the first, I filled out my application, W-2, etc. When it came time to get paid, they mailed my first check to the address, living the first time I worked for the company. Ex-wife gets the check in the mail, forges my signature and cashes it. Amazon refused to reissue the check. I went round and round with HR for months about this. Corporate lawyers were pulled in. My personal lawyer stuck up for me at no charge. Due to GA state law, where the check was cashed, I had no legal recourse to sue for my money back. as it was up to Wells Fargo to sue and press charges on my ex. Amazon stood by their claim that the check was cashed and I was paid. The entire time they treated me like a criminal and made out like I was attempting to grift them. They offered to pay up if signed an affidavit stating that I had never received the check, but backed out on the day I was supposed to sign the documents because we don't have a notary at this location and Amazon isn't willing to pay for one. Story 32. Last year, contractor gets made full-time with benefits. Everyone in his team complains because he's annoyingly friendly and tries too hard with too little experience, they said. He gets terminated overnight and his account is locked out. Comes into the office and can't log in. Asks me it's to assist and goes and makes a coffee, talks to his colleagues about how his wife is having a baby, and they're about to close on a house now that the job is secured as a permanent role. I check emails, see he was terminated overnight and locked out. He comes back and jokes about its system reliability, asking if it's sorted. I think he could tell something was up by my expression. I asked him to discuss it with his manager, who was late that day. He waited another 15-20 minutes, then had a meeting and was walked out. There's no easy way to terminate someone who loves their job, but this is the worst I've seen so far. The worst thing is, after a trial period, you need to go through a rather difficult process to fire someone here. Since he was only in the permanent role for 10 days or so and his prior contract was over, he got nothing other than a letter, a meeting, annual leave accrued for the 10 days and days worked. No notice required. Story 33, not HR, of course. At my second job out of college, working for a company that produces most of the parts that go into a thing, and those things are sold by other companies, but my company basically made every internal part of the thing those companies sold. I'm being vague intentionally because there aren't many companies in the space. Anyway, the office was a bunch of desks in a bullpen open concept type office, and the director's office was down at the end. His door was usually closed, but when he wanted to see you, he would email you. So when somebody got called into his office, you saw them quietly stand up from their desk and walk into his office. Cue 15 minutes of everyone trying not to get caught staring at the door. So the guy who sat at a desk right in front of mine, but perpendicular to mine, came in bright-eyed, well-tanned, rejuvenated, and basically looking great after his week-and-a-half cruise vacation with the wife and kids. He stood up and walked into director's office, walked out with a box in hand, cleaned out his desk quietly while trying not to cry, with me watching him from literally 2 feet away. At 8:15 a.m. the Monday he got back from vacation. Duck Story 34. My dad worked in community relations for a big company for 35 years. He was one of 2 candidates for a manager position a few years back and should have gotten the job, but they gave it to this lady who then became my dad's boss. For years, she made his work life hell. Always condescending, always rude. My dad had a performance review once, and since he always did wonderful work and everyone else loved him, the only thing she found to Karen him out for was slouching at his desk, and he was at the office too much. The whole ordeal actually affected his mental health to a point that he had to take a leave of absence for 6 weeks and had his doctor sign some papers saying that his work environment was the direct cause of his current mental state and that he shouldn't be forced to work under this woman's management any longer. The company puts him back anyway. A few months later, they conveniently decide that my dad's job needs to be moved to an office in another state, and if he wants to remain employed, he can move to said state or be laid off, just before he was eligible for retirement pension, all that good stuff. Story 35, Target afternoon. On a Saturday, I go to punch in for electronic and the machine doesn't take my team member ID after several tries. Get higher up shows up and gives me a condescending, "Come over here." I get let go 4 days after already putting in my 2-week notice, and they had already scheduled me for 2 weeks. Didn't even give me a check, just $800 cash. Not even hundreds, but 20s singles and change. They really can't just call an employee or email them that they're being let go. Gotta go through all that BS. Story 36. Not in HR, but the way I realized I was let go was when I couldn't log into my computer. Had spent all day Thursday in good spirits, talking with my boss about upcoming projects and discussing an exclusive holiday party for our top-level membership holders. Left my computer on at the end of the day because I was working on someone's account and wanted to start back up in the morning without rebooting the computer. Came in that morning, went to wake up my unit and noticed that it's asking for my login. Weird, maybe power went out overnight, I thought. Typed in my password, and it was denied. Stood there super confused, and my boss walked swiftly towards my door and wouldn't look me in the eye while asking me to follow him into the conference room. This particular room had doors you can close for privacy, but also a camera, so I knew what was coming. The worst part is after 6 years of dutiful loyalty and asking countless times for help, training, direction, as I was in a position of management and being told to Google YouTube videos, they couldn't even look me in the eye and tell me exactly why. Story 37. Not an HR worker, but last week three employees were fired in the company I work in. The lady in charge of terminating people was known in the company as Death, because when she called you in a room, crap was going down. She fired 2 people following our ridiculous protocol, which basically kicks people out, and then someone else has to pick up their stuff from the desk and take it to them outside. We usually fire them first thing in the morning, so they don't waste a whole day of work for a company they no longer work for. After doing those 2 terminations, her boss called her in her room and fired her too. Story 38. My dad was basically forced into quitting a job a couple years ago. They brought in a new guy above him, who claimed to be a literal mafia boss and pretty much acted accordingly. I don't know the details, but it was brutal, and I saw how much it wore down my dad. He quit. A year later, they sell the company and invite him to a celebratory dinner. Except, obviously, everyone else there got their cut of the significant profits, and all he'd gotten was a minor gain from the small number of shares he'd had in it. He was staying in my booked university accommodation last night. The company was in my university town, and got so monumentally ducked up, we had to book an extra night because he couldn't move from bed in the morning and was still drunk and throwing up a solid 12 hours after leaving the dinner. This reads kind of bleak, but other than feeling sorry for him, I actually find it hilarious with a bit of distance. He got more ducked up in my university accommodation than I've ever been, and I'm supposed to be the student. Story 39. I was not the HR for this company. Small tech company, owned by an old guy and a young guy who prided himself on never doing dishes. He had a maid. They made an announcement that there was a party in our conference room and had everyone shuffle over. The party turned out to be a mass layoff of everyone and their final checks. Outsourced. It was inside, shutting down all the computers and pulling power cables so no one could do any damage. The backstory. They went to buy the competition. The competition whipped out their checkbook and bought them on the spot. Story 40. We had a company downsizing a few years ago, and the company was looking to find ways of getting rid of people without paying redundancy. Basically, find any possible misconduct issues and fire people. We had quite a few internet misuse cases, but one guy who had been at the company for 15 years was called into the office for running a gambling syndicate on company property. He was screwed over because this gambling syndicate he had run was a fantasy sports league that basically the whole company played from managers to junior staff. He was fired in a meeting by a number of managers that had all been playing the fantasy league every year. Also, I will point out, he ran the league in his own time, so before and after he clocked in and during breaks. Story 41. My company eliminated the department of 4 people and 1 manager. The 2 lowest paid employees got reassigned, and the manager got reassigned as well. All 5 people had plenty of valuable skills that could be used elsewhere in company. Meanwhile, the highest paid employee was let go around 10 a.m., while the second highest was let go around 2 p.m. The 2 employees had no idea their job was at risk. Our company was not doing any layoffs, had plenty of open positions at time, and they weren't told anything from their manager. Just came in one day and found out their department was gone. It was really fun at lunch that day when the 2 p.m. person was really confused as to why her coworker was let go at 10 a.m. My favorite part was how a different manager came up to me the next day and asked me about the job responsibilities of the people let go. Like they let go 2 employees without even getting an idea of what they were working on. Also, I sat next to their desks. I was not in their department, so why would I know? Story 42. There's a case right now in Congress where a soldier was offered $6,000 to separate voluntarily. He had PTSD, which is a 100% disability rating. The paperwork they had him sign at his separation stated he couldn't collect disability. He is currently homeless, and they will let him collect disability if he pays back the $6,000. Just found out about that one today. Story 43. Local company went bankrupt. Bank took over ownership. Had sheriff evict all employees next morning. Bank reps then put chains on the doors. Nobody allowed back in. A few months later, bank hired auction company to sell assets. I went to auction. Each office was sold complete with each door numbered. If you won an office, they gave you the key and you had to take everything out that day. It made me sick to see these offices the same as the day the company closed. Coats on hangers, family photos, personal possessions, work folders, and papers on desks, as if they'd just gone out to lunch. Horrible what they did to those workers. Everyone there was horrified. Thought it had to be illegal, but no, it very much happened. Property was sold too, and turns out company had been dumping chemicals out back for decades. So even new owner got screwed too, to tune of millions for cleanup. Story 44. Had a coworker tell me about one of her previous jobs. Corporate and HR had required everyone meet at a neutral location for a business-type luncheon. Upon arrival, the employees, 300 plus, were split into 2 different rooms. The people in room A were told they were losing their jobs due to some loss of stocks and being forced to downsize, but were being offered a sizable severance. The people in room B were told they would be keeping their jobs, but would also be taking the workload of those in room A. After the meeting, they all had to eat together as it was a requirement to be there. Story 45. Not HR, but something that happened to me. Was going through a real crafty divorce. Literally a month earlier, she'd convinced me to quit my cushy government job and get a job closer to home. This is before crap hit the fan. I did, and at said new job, I was about a week after court papers, etc., and life was really hard. I went to get lunch and left my computer unlocked by accident. My new manager at new place of employment read my Facebook messages, mom emails, and decided a guy going through a divorce/custody battle was too much of an issue, I guess. And they fired me when I got back from lunch. My settlement was a whopping $5K. I suppose $5K for less than a week of work isn't terrible, but I gave up a $90K plus job a year for that crap gig. Story 46. I was HR in the benefits department. We wrapped up open enrollment. I wrapped up all of our billing for our vendors for the year, was called into the director's office, and told I had 4 weeks. Luckily, I had a job interview later that week. I was told that I would get a severance, learned I got the new job to start in a week. I told my boss, and she told me, "Congrats, but you won't get your severance." Bullcrap. Story 47. I worked for a company for 2 years, got asked to relocate to run a department in a satellite store about 2.5 hours away. Laid me off with no notice after 6 months. We've decided to go in a different direction. No complaints about the work I did, got a bit of severance and a glowing letter of recommendation, but it screwed me pretty good for a while. Story 48. I've worked in HR for more than a decade, and I've never personally been involved in unethical treatment. However, employees should leave an organization if their manager's crap and top management is incapable of doing the right thing. I spent several years working at a company where the owners did not want to support ethical decision-making and allowed terrible managers to berate, demote, and fire employees who just needed training and guidance and hire simply awful people. It sucked to be in a spot where you knew it was wrong but not illegal and not be able to gain a foothold to change anything. Very happy I left that job last year. Story 49. So, a lot of crap stories here. So here's a good one. I was let go by my company after 5 years. Got a decent severance, around 10K. Come Monday morning, I answer an ad for a freelance designer. I email the company, and within 30 minutes, they call me back, and it turned into a 4-year freelance gig. Came out 10 grand ahead. Nice, huh? One other thing. Even though HR is letting you go, you don't have to tell them anything. They want all the info they can get out of you in case a lawsuit arises. Tell them nothing. It's none of their business. Story 50. Manufacturing company in the 90s. Company announces it will be moving an entire specialized line to China. Lays off everyone who worked on that line. Later that year, company announces we hit the financial goals and they want to share the good fortune. They give everyone a piece of junk. Flimsy plastic manual Win 35mm camera with a made in China sticker on it. They must have cost all of $1 or so each. Within approximately a year, they brought that line back because the Chinese line couldn't make the parts right. But they didn't bring back any of the employees they laid off. Story 51. There's a story I was told in the company I work for. We don't have a work council despite it being mandatory by law in my country. An employee got a new job in new company, but his period of notice caused some issues with the starting date of his new job. So he wrote an email to all colleagues which stated he sought legal advice and wants to found a work council. He was escorted out of the building the same day. He went to court, got extra payoff, and was able to start his new job in time. So a pretty nice way to get screwed by HR. Story 52. Not HR, but lived through this. Got an email from management saying there was a quarterly meeting, but do not under any circumstances share this email. I forgot about it. And then the day comes. Basically, no one gets up to go to meetings until the last second possible. So anyone who did not receive the email had all of their coworkers stand up, walk to the elevators, refuse to say anything, and then after a few moments of terror, they were approached by management telling them to report for a separate meeting where they were laid off en masse. Story 53. Company I used to work for tried to sue an employee into disclosing where he was going. This was a small MSP, didn't matter. They withheld the check of another, and he had to get a lawyer and labor and industry involved to get his check. Tip of the iceberg. Story 54. My very first real job, I worked in HR at the headquarters of a large media conglomerate. 2 months in, everyone gets an email that the VP of benefits is leaving and announcing his replacement. 10 minutes later, we hear a ruckus in his office. Someone got overexcited and hit send early on the company-wide email. He was still in the crow's office, being let go, and when he went back to his desk to get his coat, he saw the email and threw a fit. Story 55. Once worked for a small IT firm. All of 4 people, including myself. I get to work one day and all my personal belongings are boxed up and sitting on my desk. I knew straight away. It was a bit rough, to be honest. I was actually super stoked to leave that dead-end job, but it was mostly hard because I had 2 kids and an almost full-term pregnant wife and was living week to week. Definitely a low point for me. Story 56. Not HR, but a pretty interesting meth job of firing people. In my old company, they had the TNT room on the top floor. It stood for tears and tantrums. The method of sacking was quick and brutal. Just a case of, you're being sacked, you will be escorted to your desk, and then you have to leave. The room was sparsely decorated. Just a desk and 2 chairs. It was designed for people having a patty. Story 57. I want to just clear something up. I'm seeing a lot of pretty crazy stories about mass layoffs. Well, just to be clear, that definitely wasn't just HR that conjured up the massive layoffs. Most likely it all came from the top executives of the organization, and mostly had to be executed by HR. I really wish people knew a little more of the inner working of their companies before they just slammed HR. I say this because I work in HR. Story 58. Not a HR person, but a former employee. A sales rep was being inappropriate to a female coworker. Nothing too bad, no assault or anything, but just enough for him to get a write-up. She reports it to HR and is promptly fired for a made-up reason. Joke's on them, though. 6 out of 8 people of the company left 3 days later when we learned about it. Story 59. I am glad that I work in Europe. Here, employees are protected and cannot get fired on the spot. If a company has to fire you, you will have at least 1 more month before your actual last day. You can only get fired on the spot during trial period or if you do something really bad, like stealing from the company or punching a coworker. Story 60. On the opposite end, I set up my employee to get terminated without him realizing. He had to go simply because we found fraud, but it still felt bad to be the one to tell him, "Oh yeah, go to the boss's main office. You live down there, don't you? Just take your car and drive yourself and punch out there," knowing that he was going to get canned as soon as he arrived. Story 61. I tend to notice a lot of people get fired shortly after becoming disabled, whether it be long-term or short-term. Of course, they can't say it's because of the disability, so they'll make up a lie saying they violated a coupon policy or just not performing well. Story 62. I was the SE Mass Bob Ree rep for a delivery company. Driver shows up at a restaurant, stoned, smoke billowing out of his cab. HR took his keys when he got back. He had been there years and was an amazing worker, always on time. Did a good job, but you can't drive a DOT vehicle while smoking. Frank. What the heck, man? Story 63. Several years ago, I worked for a big oil company, rhymes with hell, that decided to outsource all their back office operations from the US to Asia. The impacted employees were given severance packages, but the packages were dependent on them sitting side by side for 2 months with their low-cost replacements and training them on how to do their jobs. Talk about adding insult on injury. Story 64. Most millennials have had plenty of encounters with similar behaviors before. We move jobs more often than older generations have. Look at how relatable these stories are, that most replies are just reinforcing the same behavior in their companies. Story 65. Not HR, but a company I worked for flew the HR lady from Houston to Austin in the corporate jet to lay most of us off. When she got back to Houston and turned in all our paperwork, they then laid her off. At least she got to ride in the corporate jet. HR people and hirers of Reddit. What's the cringiest thing you've come across on someone's resume who was trying to stand out? Story 1. I hired for a retail store. Plenty of teenage applicants looking for first jobs. While going through applications, I came across one written in flawless cursive. The applicant was male, so not gonna lie, this was sort of surprising. His answers to questions and availability were just what we needed, so I called to offer him an interview. He had no idea what I was talking about. His mom had picked up, filled out, and submitted the application without his knowledge. He didn't end up getting hired. Story 2. My boss has a story about receiving a resume written as a narrative from the point of view of someone in a castle watching the storming of the Bastille. The applicant would describe a scene and say how that was somehow representative of some standard office job skills. Fiery projectiles fly overhead. I take note of this using my keen observation skills and Microsoft Word proficiency. I don't know. It was a data entry job. They didn't get hired. Story 3. Not a hirer, but was told of this by my manager. A guy who applied to be a security officer at the casino I work at put on his resume that he was prom king in high school. He ended up being super cool and a great worker, and we call him the prom king to this day. Story 4. Used to be in charge of hiring interns. Can't tell you how many resumes I saw that said, achievements, Time Person of the Year 2006, so overdone. FYI, in 2006, Time said that you were the Person of the Year, because in 2006, the World Wide Web became a tool for bringing together the small contributions of millions of people and making them matter. Story 5. I was hiring a tenor section leader for a professional choir. On his resume, the applicant noted that he was openly gay and that he sang his best and highest tenor notes when seated next to an attractive bass. At first, I thought he was just adding a little humor to his resume to get my attention. But he was being truthful. He really did sing even better when seated next to an attractive bess, who, as it turned out, was also gay and charmed by the new tenor. Story 6. I have two favorite things I've seen on resumes. Accept most cultures and beliefs. I found it just a little weird he would even put it on there. For a web developer job, a link to a website the guy had made. A black background with a single picture and several buttons which didn't work. Story 7. The cringiest thing I ever saw wasn't actually on a resume. I remember this 21-year-old kid, he was a grown adult male, and his mother showed up to submit an application at the restaurant I worked at. She did all of the talking, answered nearly all of the questions, asked her own questions about the job to see if it was a good fit for her son, etc. Apparently, he liked to cook at home, so she was trying to get him a job in a kitchen. I felt really bad for the guy. He wasn't mentally handicapped or anything, the chef asked flat out. Is your son a special needs kid or something? He was just a big fat pussy. Story 8. In the first paragraph of her cover letter, she stated, 3 words that describe me: caring, brilliant, and dedicated. Further down, after stating why she wanted the job, she wrote, I know that God will never forsake me, and through his divine grace I can conquer any goal. Now I'm a religious person, but it is such a strange thing to write in a job application. It was a position within government too, so it's our job to be secular on the job. Story 9. My brother once interviewed a guy that got caught flat out lying on his resume and work experience. For the sake of this story, there were 3 HR people in the room during the interview. The first interview went okay. The candidate was pretty much fresh out of university but had decent internship experience. One thing that stood out to my brother was the candidate's participation in the inter-university robot engineering competition. My brother participated during university, and a friend and colleague participated during the same time as the candidate, so they asked him his opinion on the candidate. I never heard that name before. This led to a closer examination of the resume, and they realized that pretty much work or internship experience and special certifications were all fake. The candidate was already scheduled for a second interview, so they kept it and added the colleague to the interview panel. During the interview, they asked him to elaborate on his experiences, especially on the robot competition. He talked about it for a while and was pretty convincing until the colleague looked him in the eye and said, Dude, I was the official president and organizer of the competition for all 4 years. You said you've participated, and I've never seen your sorry ass before in my life. What else can we expect to be fake on your resume, and how does it affect your so-called qualities of honesty and hard work? The interview was quickly over after that. Story 10. Somebody had listed their experience as CEO of the family and tried to pass of their experience as a stay-at-home mother as legitimate qualifications for a senior director in the federal government when we asked, do you have experience managing, supervising, and evaluating performance of human resources? And do you have financial management experience, including conducting expenditure estimates and budgetary reviews? Sorry, raising your child does not qualify you to supervise and manage a directorate of 50-plus people, and planning and budgeting your family vacation to Disney World is absolutely not financial management experience. Story 11. Oh, crap. I can answer this one. Okay, so I work at a retail shoe store, and while I'm not the manager, I've been privy to reading some of the resumes that get put in on occasion. One was from this guy, whose name I can't remember, so I'll call him Dave. One thing my manager was super stingy about when receiving resumes was the cover letter. She said if you didn't give a crap to write one specific enough for the place, you didn't really want the job. So she ended up throwing out every resume that said, to the owner of the establishment, or anything like that. Anyway, we get an email from Dave. Seems all right, good spelling and grammar. Says he knows the store and its good reputation. All seems good. Cover letter attached. My boss opens the cover letter titled Cover Letter, and there's this enormous slab of text. No paragraphs, no sign of punctuation or anything. And instead of having an actual cover letter written, it's this mini story rant thing about the nature of oblivion and darkness versus light. It was the cringiest thing I've ever read and looked like it was something made by an edgy 13-year-old. We're pretty sure it was attached by accident, but I choose to believe that's what Dave really thought a cover letter was, and that's how you truly leave a good lasting impression. For clarification, my boss rejected every cover letter that was an obvious copy, paste, and sent to every store, i.e., to whom it may regard, I, John Smith, would like to express interest in working at your establishment. She just wanted something actually written, specifically for the store. Also, for those who ask, I work at a high-grade hiking mountaineering store. Most of the staff is mid-20s or older. Story 12. I'm in the process of hiring 3 new attorneys and 2 paralegals. Worst paralegal submission, applicant misspelled her own name. I called her and asked if the name on the email was her name, or does she use an alias? She said, no, that was her name. I said, so which Ashley are you, Ashley or Ashley? She said, Ashley. I said, "Why do you have Ashley on your resume?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. It must have been an autocorrect, TF lady, who misspells their name on their own resume." Attorney. Positions are for 1 2-year and 4 8-year. I got a resume for an attorney who has been licensed for 28 years. Resume included 4 years of legal practice and 5 years shrimping, 4 years on a crab boat, 6 years managing a strip club, a few gaps in the resume, and then noted that he had been suspended from the practice of law, which prompted his brief departure from the legal practice. Story 13. Screening for a CFO for a major UK brewing company. One guy was clearly not the full quid. No financial experience whatsoever, and the only job he had ever had was 6 months cleaning test tubes in a lab. He tried to explain the gaping holes in his work history as being classified by MI5. He got my name and phone number from the rejection letter and would ring me daily for weeks asking when his interview was. And when I would politely explain he had no financial experience for the role, he would rant on about how he was a fast learner. Story 14. My workplace, a warehouse store, has gotten bitten on hiring customers. No, I don't mean people who just walk in and request an application. These are regulars who normally divulge their personal issues to us. I know what you're thinking. Then obviously don't hire them, and your fault if you do. Well, there are periods of time when you are so short-staffed that you'll take anyone. Case in point, humor on a written application does not work. This was such with a regular who applied. She gave reasons for leaving her previous employers as hated it, boss was an idiot, and stopped showing up. My boss asked me to give her my honest opinion about the applicant, and I told her it sounded like a bad idea. My boss responded, "Oh, well, I already hired her. She seems like a nice lady." Sure enough, this woman's work ethic is what got her fired. Overall, the first thing I look at is appearance. Honest to goodness, the people with the worst hygiene bomb on spelling and grammar on the written application. Therefore, they don't make it to an interview. Last year, we were hiring for a floor position, and the person who showed up had long, greasy hair and BO that hung around after he left. He kept calling and showing up asking why we weren't granting him an interview. I told him we were still in the hiring process, yet he took that as an insult and threatened to call OSHA on us. I had to stifle a laugh before I told him that threats don't get you hired. Someone who did get an interview ended up telling us that should we hire him, we had to let him take off 6 months out of the year so he could take trips in his RV. He said, "I'm going to hold a job until I decide when I'm taking my RV to Florida. I'd expect my job to be here when I returned." Story 15. Obligatory not in HR, but the worst I've heard of is someone mailing a shoe with their resume to get a foot in the door. Story 16. I had a resume that was printed on pink paper, the lady's glamour shot on the upper corner, and some kind of perfume on it. Recently received a resume with emojis and logos for the companies that he worked for as bullets. A long time ago, I reviewed an application that had the following: position, ass, man, reason for leaving, chicken all day. He worked at a fried chicken establishment. Story 17. I was working retail and was an assistant manager. Sometimes I did interviews, but not often. This guy came in with his girlfriend or wife and handed me her application. I started to ask her some questions and he answered every one of them. I flagged down my manager and he asked some questions. He answered every question and she would chime in, but didn't really say much. We didn't offer her a position, but I was always kind of curious what exactly was going on there. I didn't get a good feeling from them. Story 18. Someone came to our company for an interview, and the first thing he said to me as he handed me his resume was, "For your convenience, I've broken it down into 3 parts: professional resume, athletic and special skills resume, and full name trivia." What an idiot. Another thing that he said that stood out to me is, how would I describe myself? 3 words: hardworking, alpha male, jackhammer, merciless, insatiable. He also made his name into an acronym that he presented to me on a poster board, and later we learned he ran a beet farm with his mentally ill cousin, as well as working previously with a paper company in a position that he felt was a dead-end job. Or in his words, "I hitched my trailer to a horse with no legs." Needless to say, we hired him. Story 19. A girl attached a picture of herself, wearing a showy bikini. Even for advertising, that's low. No, I didn't save the picture. We just admired it introspectively for a few minutes, then moved on to the next candidate. Story 20. I was the person at a staffing agency that reviewed the resumes and then sent them to the appropriate staffing manager. So I wasn't actually an HR professional, but I was their assistant. This one chick's resume was 3 pages printed on powder blue cardstock with pink stripes printed, had anchors all over it, anchor bullet points, anchor watermark, anchors in various other places, and was littered with inspirational quotes and had a selfie printed on it. She was applying for an admin assistant position. I thought I'd add some others. Guys, make a professional email address. When your email is Dairy Almef Deal Big D or Wannago69, you're not going to be taken seriously. We judge you on your emails. Don't smoke weed before coming up to your interview. We smell it through your Axe body spray. Also, don't bring a bag of pee with you to the substances test. Story 21. Not an HR, but my aunt's resume is pretty cringy. She hasn't held a job for more than 6 months at a time for probably 20 years. She has several advanced degrees in fields she has never worked in. But the cringy part is, she lists her children's accomplishments as her own. Varsity soccer, 3.2 or whatever GPA in middle school, etc. She often complains about how she doesn't get any points for being a mother at 50, when most 50-year-old women looking for a job are a mother, and they have accomplishments that aren't their kids' varsity soccer. Story 22. We were hiring for a new maintenance position about 4 to 5 years ago at my old job. They made it a thing to let the employees look over the applications and even Facebook pages of some of the applicants who got through vetting, so just to make sure they wouldn't cause problems with existing employees. Anyways, one employee was hired on without anyone's approval for 2 reasons. One is diversity, and the other is because he was a football player on the team the boss's boss liked. Guy turned out to be a total and didn't contribute at all. Eventually, he got fired for calling the boss and boss's boss cocksucker heck members after having him sit down and explaining to him that his everyday 2-hour-long breaks for the last month were all caught on camera. We only worked for 6 hours a day to begin with. As for the resume, I convinced a good friend of mine to sneak it to me and found that it had been filled in with black crayon. In the skills area were things like can shoot basketball from 3-point line and hella good or check my mixtape. My personal favorite was blank school football player. Hey, boss's boss name. I know you was reading this hire me mang. I swear to Christ, it was the most stereotypical hood crap I had ever read. When I meet buddies from the old job, we still joke about it. Story 23. It wasn't on a resume, but somebody who had submitted an application somehow got my phone number and called repeatedly. I only screened the applications. I didn't do the actual hiring. The guy was trying to stand out, I guess, by attempting to develop a rapport with me, but he would keep me on the phone for like 20 minutes, talking himself up and asking me all kinds of weird questions. We have a system for hiring people where you don't actually meet them, but rather critique their lengthy application and whether or not they meet all the criteria that HR has set for that particular round of hiring. I guess it's supposed to be fair, but we also end up with a lot of creeps whose personal suitability doesn't get screened in the process. I think he had been screened out because he didn't possess one of these criteria, so I'd explained it to him. He didn't take it well, and he would continue calling me each time more aggressive and angry and pretty much yelling at me. He wasn't even offered a job yet, and he was lecturing me and demanding what the terms of his employment would be. He was also a heavy breather, so it was like talking to a cliche movie murderer. We ended up finding out from another region that they had hired him on a term contract and he had problems harassing and assaulting women in the workplace. He didn't get hired. Story 24. The town I live in has what is essentially a cake factory. They produce boxed cake mixes and other various baking goods. I had a former employee of said place put down that he was a fudge packer as his previous occupation. Story 25. I once received a resume that had a YouTube link at the bottom with no note. I opened it. It was a video of her drunkenly reviewing a Star Trek The Next Generation episode. No explanation. She was not qualified and thus didn't get the job. But I so wanted to interview her. Story 26. Mid-20s guy walks into my startup. His former experience was 3 months at a gas station and 1 year as a Twitch Minecraft streamer. He dropped off his app wearing an Army Rangers t-shirt. He was not a ranger. And flip-flops. It was clear that he was counting on somebody not knowing what Twitch was because it listed things like social media outreach, video game marketing, and teaching people how to play the games. Also, responsibilities included interacting with fans and those curious about the games and how to play them. I believe he also listed that he was a mod on his Minecraft server. When I more or less said no thanks, on the spot, my dad is, like it was supposed to impress me. I kind of shrugged and asked on who that was. His dad owned 3 gas stations in the area, including the one he worked at for 3 months. He had listed some coding experience, and at the time I was in school and tried to strike up a conversation about coding. He bragged about making very cool games, but couldn't remember what language they were written in and wasn't able to show me any screenshots, GitHubs, Story 27. So I do the initial review of resumes at my company. I post the jobs, sent an assessment to each and every person who might possibly meet our needs. Cringiest resume I ever saw was this guy who included a low-res duck-face selfie centered at the very top. And the rest of his resume, as a coworker pointed out, looked a lot like a Domino's flyer. It was awful. This was for an entry-level admin job at an engineering firm, and this guy's resume looked like a really bad attempt at graphic design. But he more or less had the skills we were looking for, so I sent him the assessment, and to my complete shock, he passed. Set up an interview and the dude flaked, and flaked with a bogus-sounding excuse, can't even remember what it was. And then he flaked the rescheduled interview. Third time around, I replied with I'm afraid we're moving forward with other candidates at this time. Story 28. This lady brought in her resume. She listed pet sitter as previous experience, which isn't that odd, but then included a bulleted list of the names of the pets she sat for. Yef lady. Story 29. I placed an ad online looking for full-time, long-term construction laborers. I specified that candidates send their resume to my email address and I would contact them if they qualified for an interview. I get an email from a fellow with Cool Zach in the name bar of his email. Intrigued, I open the email to find no resume attached, and the only text in the body is his phone, Hemrar. Shoot me a TX if you need me. If I had the time and money to waste, I'd love to hire people like this. I'd love to see how this guy functions on a daily basis. Even if he was a total failure at the job, I feel like the amusement might be worth it. Story 30. Honestly, the most cringeworthy thing I've seen is on an older applicant's resume. His resume was 12 pages long with pictures of when he was in the Army, high school football, and just of when he was younger. It was odd, really. Also, he was 70, so they were black and white pictures. Another thing that makes me cringe and not care for humans is when I receive calls about child support or medical support notices. Some employees can't stand the fact that since they had a child and didn't want to support them, the government requires us to deduct money from there. Check for benefits and child support. I've had so many calls with such classic one-liners such as, "That kid ain't mine," or "That git lives in another state with his mom," and "I already pay child support. Why should I give him more money if I don't see him, her?" I like my job, but people like that make my brain hurt from time to time. Story 31. My dad was head of HR for a multinational company, which somehow landed him on some board that granted internships to local college students, not with his company. He once had to recuse himself because a girl's interview was so bad that he started laughing and couldn't stop. There were a number of things, but as I recall, what pushed him over the edge was that when asked how she had been using her time since graduating high school 5 years earlier and beginning college several months ago, she said simply, "Hanging out." He had to leave the room. When he finally got it together, he walked back in and told the young lady that he would arrange another interviewer to speak with her, because he didn't think it would be fair for him to do it after what had just happened. I hope she nailed that second interview and learned something, but I doubt it. Story 32. Girl applying for an internship uses a template CV that has desired position field and goes on to write 4 to 5 rows of jobs, from manager to programmer, designer, waitress, chef, hotel worker, driver, and whatnot. I have no idea how she ended up with such a list. Some guy sent a CV and the first achievement was winning a poker tournament. That's cool, except in the interview, he started to complain how he was a good poker player, but he lost all his money playing poker and now he needs a job. An older guy said he speaks Cyprus because he was in Cyprus, like he invented a language for that place and said he speaks it. Another older guy used the standard language proficiency table. The reading skill on English was Italian. Story 33. Giant clip art at the top that stated "Dream Big." Resume lacked contact information for the candidate. Also fairly recently, I had somebody apply for a skilled labor position. I knew the guy and had actually worked with him a couple of years ago. We had to let him go because he had a terrible temper and wasn't a very hard worker. 2 days after applying the first time, I got an email with his resume attached again, and the text in the email was, "Yeah, right. If you needed skilled, you would have called me." Story 34. I wrote that I might be a wizard on an application once. They called me in for an interview still and asked me why I thought that. I just told them it hadn't been proven that wasn't one yet, so didn't want to rule anything out. They offered me the job, but I ended up turning it down because it was $10 to work in a call center. Story 35. I hire staff for a music teacher. One guy was going through the various styles of music he played. He included duck music. During the interview, I realized he was referring to funk music. Only one error on the resume, and that was it. We did hire him. Great staff member. Story 36. One guy listed International Man of Intrigue in the experience section. It initially worked because the team was curious and wanted to know more about him. But then we found out it just meant he was born in one country, went to school in another, and then moved to the US. Story 37. Not HR, but was reviewing applicants at my old job for my manager with the job of throwing out the crazies. A 17-year-old boy had applied for a janitor job we had. Under special skills, he wrote, "Can rap the rap verse from Bare Naked Ladies 1 week, weird." But everything else looked okay on his resume, so I set up an interview for him. When my manager asked him to do the rap, he blushed and said it was a lie to make his resume stand out. Like I've heard of fudging a resume before. But oh my god. Also, he didn't get the job. Story 38. I wasn't a hirer, but I was the supervisor at my old job, which meant resumes would get handed to me. Then I would bring them up and put them in a little basket on the hiring manager's desk. One time I got one that used a smiley face. Not once, but twice. It was 1 page long and included such goodies as worked the circus and stocked shelves at Walmart. He didn't seem to have special needs when I talked with him, although perhaps he did. I more got the impression that he just hadn't gotten a full education. I felt kind of bad for him. Story 39. Someone sent in their wristbands from every concert they went to that summer. They included a letter about how they needed to make money in time for the next festival season, and they included their planned schedule. Basically, they were saying that they only wanted to work for a couple of months before quitting. They thought their knowledge of music would impress us. A woman was interviewing to be a part-time, entry-level worker. She asked if we thought it would be a problem if a week after she started, she left for China for 10 weeks. She wanted to know if we'd hold her position. Story 40. I've never been in HR, but a kid had my coworker, I was right next to them, call up a manager to try and get an on-the-spot interview at a CD and movie store. His resume, imagine a full magazine spread with graphics and color, but with only 5 lines of text. He turned around to leave the store, and the manager tossed the resume immediately and scolded my coworker for wasting her time. Another time, we got a fax at a liquor store from a kid whose most notable resume line was that we went to high school in the tropics. No work experience, no skills, and no explanation as to why we should hire him. Story 41. I frequently get candidates who attach selfies of themselves onto their resumes. I'm not really sure why they think it makes them stand out, even professional photos. I just think it's best to keep them off. For me, the number one thing that makes a resume stand out is when they're actually qualified. 2 is their extracurriculars hobbies. I've interviewed an engineering manager who was also a certified yoga instructor, a SWE who was also a DJ on the side, and some others who had some pretty cool hobbies. Also had some engineers list some really cool apps they created in their spare time. Had some great conversations with candidates about stuff like that. Story 42. Not the cringiest, but I do cringe when people put personality traits in their resume. Hardworking, quick learner, trustworthy, committed, good listener. People, this isn't a dating profile. Story 43. There was once this person who handed in a 15+ page resume detailing every single extracurricular class they had attended from all through high school up until the current time, and all their achievements. Think of things like first in X contest, grade 8, attended workshop on something and got a best effort certificate, etc., etc. Everyone in the hiring department looked at that pile of paper in awe, but did not go through it all. Suffice to say, they did not get hired. This was also for an entry-level customer service job. Story 44. I got a resume where the guy kept talking about himself in third person. That was odd. I also had a guy apply for a Linux admin job who misspelled Linux. It wasn't just once either. Story 45. Not on a resume, but I received a cover letter from a guy with an MBA that actually said, "How the hell are you? Here's a resume." Did not call him for an interview. Story 46. I used to be a supervisor at a vape shop and had this gem apply. He had listed it gloving, the LED light gloves from Raving, and he was a male model. He also listed he didn't vape or know anything about the hardware. We gave him the interview for craps and giggles and was not disappointed. I swear to God, this guy was dressed and had an attitude like Zoolander. Needless to say, he didn't get the job. Story 47. If you're a clear job hopper, it is pretty cringeworthy. There's obviously some issue if you've had 12 jobs in the last 5 to 6 years. That's extreme, but if you're switching jobs every 6 months to a year, I will think you are not going to be a reliable hire. Story 48. I interviewed a girl for a call center sales job, and she was like 19 or 19. Asked her, "Can you tell me about a time you had to sell something?" She replied with, "I worked at Sport Check, and when I sold a winter jacket, I would try and upswell them a matching pair of gloves or hat." Decent answer. Then she follows up with, "But it was a lot of work, so I stopped doing it." Story 49. Glitter. Yes, an adult sent our recruiters a resume that had glitter in the envelope. Still convinced it was from someone who secretly, or perhaps not so secretly, loathed our company. That crap gets everywhere. Story 50. A girl included a paragraph about herself, written in third person, listing her likes and dislikes, hobbies, stuff like that. Read like something from a dating app. Story 51. Coworker was hiring a programmer. Very experienced dude, submitted his work at developing a streaming adult video platform for Android. We studied his work. It was impressive. Story 52. I got out of the military a few months ago and started working at the front desk of a tech company. I was offered a 30-day trial for a marketing position at our company, so we started the interview process, and they asked for my help looking through resumes. While looking through resumes, I looked over one and saw military experience, and under that it said, rank military spouse. Needless to say, it ended up in the trash bin shortly after. Story 53. I remember a former boss saying that he read a resume once where under accomplishments and awards, the candidate wrote 2006 Time Magazine Person of the Year. I looked it up, and the Time Person of the Year that year was you. and there was a little mirror on the cover. I mean, technically, he could back his claim up. Didn't work, though. Story 54. I once put on my resume that I sold Halo 3 accounts for a job at a DuPont plant. I still remember the look on that guy's face. I'm pretty sure he told the headhunter who was trying to get me a job, because they stopped answering my calls after that. Story 55. Not HR, but I worked in a warehouse, and a potential hire for a driver position was being given a tour. He was wearing a shirt with pot leaves on it and the slogan, "Why go to high school when you can go to school high?" I thought it was absurd he even got a tour. Story 56. I worked for a big accounting firm. Some college students would insist that their parents sit in on interviews. Some firms banned the practice. Our recruiter said, "If you really think your parents sitting in on an interview will help you get the job, I'm not going to stop you." She didn't hire any children of extreme helicopter parents. Story 57. This guy's resume had a couple paragraphs how America is relocating job to Asia and India. Decided to bring him in for an interview for an entry-level warehouse job. He was actually a pretty crazy guy and was homeless. He did bring in an updated resume, though. Story 58. HR manager here, I once got sent a CV with an up-to-date payslip attached. The guy was boasting in his cover letter about the insane amount of money he makes, and that if we can't match or increase this, he would not be interested in pursuing the application. I did not invite him in. Story 59. It wasn't a resume. They wrote an essay instead, and the first sentence was, "I don't like writing typical resumes. I think they are a waste of time and full of lies, but whatever." It went right in the trash. Story 60. Our standard application had several checkboxes for illegal substance use. Taking an honesty will get me the job approach, the applicant provided a separate list of various substances that were not listed on our form. He aced the checkboxes as well. Managers, HR peoples, owners, and etc. What red flags can an employee notice before they are fired? Story 1. When I was about to get the axe due to layoffs, I had my editor come up to me and ask what I was working on. "Oh, I got some articles on the pipeline and some quick revision. Can you give me a list of everything you are working on?" "Sure." Story 2. Your workload will get lighter and lighter. You'll complete projects and no new projects will be given to you. Avi, this is so that when it comes time to drop the axe, there will be minimal transitioning needed for works in progress. Story 3. There shouldn't need to be any red flags. If you're potentially being fired, you should already know why. Your manager should have been counseling you along the way. Not sure why the downvotes. If you're fired and are at all surprised, your manager failed to properly manage you. Story 4. At an hourly job, if they stop putting you on the schedule, make you only work 1 or 2 shifts a week, you're probably about to be fired. One of my managers was a fan of not telling people that they were about to be fired and then not putting them on any shifts for 2 weeks. If the person didn't ask her what was happening and why they weren't scheduled to work for the next 2 weeks, she just never put them on another shift again. If they asked her what was up, that was the only time that she would talk to them about their performance, and she'd either fire you or give you another chance. Story 5. They stop investing in you. No more training. You are not included on teams. Requests for new hardware go unanswered. Your offers of initiative fall on deaf ears. It feels like you are in an eerie calm before the storm. It feels like a breather, but it's because their focus has changed. Things are happening in the background. They are getting their ducks in a row, and it's done in secret because they still really want to surprise you. The storm will come, and it's the meeting with you, your boss, and a person from HR. I had an HR person ask me, "Are you unhappy in your job?" to see if I would quit. Before all this started, they were double-checking all my work. I had to walk a very thin line. I had a manager go around to the entire department and ask everyone about me so they could build a pipe. It was a real witch hunt, and all because they didn't want to pay severance. Was I happy? No, I wasn't happy because they radically changed my job description, and I had a mentally unbalanced boss who was seeing 3 doctors, an MD, a chiropractor, and a psychiatrist. Eventually, the company realized they needed to pay the severance, and at that point, they dropped their plan to work me out the door, and they paid the severance package. PIP. Performance Improvement Plan, Story 6. I think a sign you're being displaced is silence. If you are used to a flood of communication, email, phone calls, etc., from someone, and suddenly that goes dead without explanation, then it's a sign the relationship is about to change drastically. Be that your boss firing you being moved to a new job in the company, a client canceling their service. It means there is some intelligence you're not privy to on the other side, and you should brace yourself. Prepare. Story 7. Fired or laid off. Before being fired, presumably for performance reasons, not something obvious like being busted dropping rabbit turds into the coffee pot, most places with management that's worth a damn will give you an honest review and a chance to shape up. Many will give you more than one chance, depending on how easily you can be replaced. So if you've had a sit down with your boss where underperformance was a key topic, then don't be surprised when they come around your desk with a cardboard box and a security officer if you don't shape up. Story 8. I work in IT, and when someone is being fired, I am notified a few minutes before the employee is told. We have a checklist. Disable network and email credentials, then forcibly disconnect their connections, sessions. So if you suddenly are kicked out of your email and can't connect to network resources, you are very likely being terminated very shortly. Story 9. There are a couple of warning signs. 1. You are put on an improvement plan. Major red flag. For most companies, this is the first step to firing you and is more of a way to protect themselves from lawsuit than to help you. Improvement plans are not ones in which the company says, "You are doing great, let's get you some training to get you to the next level." They are typically, "You are not meeting your objectives, and we are going to put you on a plan to improve." This may be confirmation bias, but I have never met anyone who was put on an improvement plan and was not subsequently fired within 1 year. Now, sometimes it may not be your fault, but once you get put on one, you need to do the following. A. Look for a new job immediately. B. Improve at work, finding new ways to meet objectives. C. Get all feedback in writing. Being on an improvement plan, no matter how much you improve, is a major black mark on your work record. When it comes time for layoffs, you are number 1 on the list. Furthermore, if you ever make a mistake at work, people will be significantly more lenient and more likely to give up on you. About a year ago, my girlfriend was put on an improvement plan at work, mainly because my girlfriend said she could not work all day on Thanksgiving. She was salaried. Afterwards, my girlfriend worked harder and was constantly getting positive feedback from her boss. However, she was fired 5 months later over something inconsequential. What my girlfriend did wrong was she did not look for a new job, and more importantly, never got the positive feedback on paper. To put things in perspective, she started a new job 4 months ago, and they are already talking about promoting her. Her boss took me aside at the company party to tell me how grateful he was that my girlfriend was working there. I only bring that up to remind people that being fired is not always a negative reflection on you. 2. Your manager starts to constantly ask for updates on every project. Sometimes you have micromanagers, but if you did not have one before and they are checking every little thing you do, it is most likely because you aren't completing tasks in a timely manner and are on your way to an improvement plan. 3. Not a sign you are getting fired, but one that you are not doing great in the office. If people constantly email your manager about a project you are working on, or even worse, managing, or have your manager copied on every single email they send to you, this is a sign that they don't know about your contributions or don't believe you can make day-to-day decisions. If you're in the same job for a year and this continues to happen, you have an issue with a micromanager, or you are not seen as a dependable player. Either way, it is time to look towards greener pastures. Story 10. Setting you up to fail. For example, repeatedly being set and impossible, unachievable targets. This is how HR give themselves grounds to fire you. Story 11. I once worked at a fabrication facility that pretty much lived contract to contract. The place had no problem staying in business, but the number of employees required fluctuated significantly. There were key personnel that they wanted to keep all the time, like me. It was actually mentioned in my job interview that I would have that status. We all knew who the other key people were, and there was an understanding that we didn't go advertising that. Most of our employees were skilled tradesmen who knew the deal and had no problems keeping themselves in a job. Actually, our place was a lower-paying, easy job they would do for a bit to spend time with their families before they hit the road again and made some serious money. Very skilled welders. There were others who had been there a while and knew the machinery and the trade well enough that they would make every effort to keep them if possible. These guys were pretty safe, probably as safe as I was. There was enough little crap coming through to keep them on the payroll. Some of them would show up and disappear so often that one would forget that they weren't around the whole time. These guys were pretty skilled metal workers, and if the situation was one they weren't happy with, they wouldn't have a lot of trouble getting on with another outfit. Unfortunately, they would sometimes hire helpers for big jobs. These people were usually young with not a lot of job or life experience. Their pay was figured into the quote and was usually quite good for their skill level, and there was a lot of overtime. One reason the pay was good was because the employer didn't really have to worry about carrying these people long term. The tasks were very demanding, and they wanted to keep the helpers for the length of the job. For a lot of these guys, this was the first solid, well above minimum wage paycheck they had ever seen. Too bad it wouldn't last. To be fair, the company did try to keep good people if another job was lined up. They weren't complete soulless gits, but if they had to significantly increase their headcount for a big job at the end, some people had to go. It is not uncommon for places to do this. Usually someone, myself included, would take them aside and quietly made sure that they knew the deal and let them know that they should save some of that nice pay or at least not make any long-term plans. Most knew the score, but there were always one or two people who refused to accept that they were going out. They would bend over backward trying to ingratiate themselves and would wander around bleeding like a lost lamb as the reality of what was about to happen drew close. It always happened 30 minutes before the end of shift on a Friday. The worst one was this young guy with a wife and kid that he had way too early. He simply refused to let go of the idea that he was somehow going to be kept on. He was a good kid, and more than one of us quietly told him the realities of his situation more than once, but it was the first time he had ever been able to provide some quality of life for his family. Friday came around. He came up to me and said that they were going to have a meeting with him before end of shift. With his eyes full of self-deluded hope, absolutely convinced that something nice was going to happen, because he worked so hard. He did work quite hard. He really did. It didn't matter though. I never saw him again. I shrugged and went back to work. Story 12. A few jobs ago, my boss claimed he was going to make 25 sales in FY 2011 enterprise software. He made 2. He had also given me access to his Outlook calendar at one point. One day, I saw he had scheduled a meeting with HR the next day. The meeting was titled Metropolis PT 3.1 Discussion. Another time, when I worked at a startup right before the 2008 bust, I received an Outlook meeting request on Thursday afternoon. The meeting was titled Meeting and scheduled for Friday morning at 9 a.m. Sometimes the red flags are very red and very big. Story 13. Maybe signs of a general layoff more than you specifically being fired. But when the company starts cutting back on things and generally letting itself go, firing the janitors and going with a temp service once a week, equipment that needs to be replaced, remaining in a state of disrepair, no more parking passes, no more free coffee in the break room. It's good for a company to be frugal, but when they start nickel and diming, it's a sign that things are not going particularly well, and they're just delaying the inevitable. Story 14. Emails, which clearly detail anything involving poor performance. Bill, like we discussed in your performance review, we'd really like to see improvement in areas XYZ. Bill, thank you for meeting with me and discussing ways in which you could have conducted yesterday's meeting in a more professional manner. Bill, your junk is hanging out of your zipper. Story 15. 2 months before my office was closed, the top HR person at the Fortune 100 company I worked for sent out an email that the CEO of the company would be visiting every regional office in August, and was kind enough to include a schedule of said visits. Our office was not included. Just about everyone in our office replied and jokingly asked if it meant our office was being closed. She responded that the exclusion of the Portland branch was just an oversight. We later found out that those visits were to reassure the other branches that there would be no additional office closures. Gits. Story 16. In the book The Long Walk by Stephen King, a group of young men are forced to walk above 5 kilometers per hour in a contest to see who can go the longest. If you drop below 5 kilometers per hour 3 times within a few hours, more to it than that, but you're shot by soldiers pacing you nearby from a Humvee. King repeatedly describes the rest of the walkers all moving away from someone once they've taken their second warning and it's clear they're about to get their ticket punched. I've always found the same thing happens in the workplace. You can tell when someone's going to get canned. If you know, no matter what, you're going to start pulling away. Every time this has happened to me, I've been fired. Every time I've noticed it happening to someone else, whether I knew it beforehand or not, they got fired. Story 17. My boss told me that a colleague of mine was near useless and just not improving. He asked me to write up a procedure for our department so that he could hold my colleague to it, with a view to pushing him out the door when he wasn't following it to the letter. I then made it a priority to help my colleague, as he was a good guy who just needed a bit more guidance. We went out for lunch 3 days in a row, and I discussed ways for him to improve his relationship with others. He always asked why I was so liked and got on so well with others, and talked about things he needed to do better. Everything I suggested was practical and achievable, not just you need to work harder or some bullcrap. I never told him I was tasked with writing the procedure because I knew he would freak out and panic and crap. Anyway, he hasn't given the boss one reason to write him up since then, and the boss even said to me, "Gee, he's really lifted his game." I could have silently ducked him, but I chose to help him instead, and I'm really glad I did. Besides his continual improvement, it really reinforces I did the right thing. I've slowly built him up and invested time in him because our previous boss never did and just treated him like crap. He treated me like crap too, but I could handle it, whereas my colleague really took a blow to his self-esteem over it. No ducking wonder he was struggling. Anyway, he's doing well, getting compliments, and he's pretty much my right-hand man now. Story 18. If there's a change in upper-level management, new executive, VP, etc., it usually means there will be a significant reorganization coming and people will lose their jobs. It's the new exec VP's way of putting their stamp on the company. I'm not kidding when I say good, highly effective, tenured employees are let go for no reason other than the new guy was on an ego trip and wanted to flex their muscle. Story 19. if they transfer you into an entirely different job title without training, especially if that job title would benefit from being bilingual. I was working at Burger King at age 16, now 25, and was trained as a cashier drive-through attendant at an older location since the location I was hired to had yet to open. On the grand opening of the new location, I was scheduled to work the lunch shift with 2 other cashiers. The computers we trained on were much older than the system in the new BK, which had unresponsive touchscreens and menus that were different. About 10 minutes into my shift, after a 30-minute bike ride in the Arizona summer, I'm drenched in sweat, causing the touchscreens to barely operate. A large man with a very big family came up to my register and had a very complicated order with lots of substitutions and adjustments. I stumbled through the order, sweat dripping down my face and arms. It turns out he owned the franchise. He instructed my manager to put me in the kitchen. Problem was, I wasn't trained in the kitchen, like at all. I went back there with 0 training and asked the one guy that spoke English TF I was supposed to do. He gave me a really quick rundown of how to load meat from the freezer into the meat cooking machine and how to use the fryer. I worked the rest of my shift stumbling around, ruining a bunch of patties of meat and burning French fries. The following day, I went in and saw that the schedule had been adjusted and I was scheduled from 5 hours to 2 and no other days that week. The next week, I went back and I was scheduled again for 2 hours on 1 day a week. I never went back, but I did steal a backpack full of frozen beef patties in its original plastic bag and ended up grilling them for my friends and I at a party a few days later. If they don't like you, they might transfer you so you fail enough for them to justify cutting your hours to 2 a week. Story 20. I'll share my story of the time I was fired, not HR, just a lowly cable installer. About 6 months prior to my firing, I had one negative performance review. Now in my, and everyone I worked with, opinions, the standards were far too high to get positive customer reviews. Alas, there was nothing we could do about it. I was put on an improvement plan after the negative performance review, but nothing was mentioned of it after that. No follow-up meetings about performance or where I stood on the plan. My supervisor was always a bit of a micromanager, so as far as I knew, it never became more or less. Cut to the day of. I go to work a little early and clean my truck because it was a disaster. Go to check my jobs for the day, and I had none. Didn't really think much of it. It had happened a bunch of times before. Try to swipe into the building and my ID wouldn't work. My stomach dropped. Went in and my supervisor asked for my iPad password and my locker combo. I asked him if there was anything I needed to know, and he said no. Go to grab a coffee before clocking in, and am cut off by my boss again and asked to step into his office where his boss and an HR lady were seated. You can guess what happened next. After it happened, they asked for my ID and then told me I was trespassing on company, property, and I was to leave immediately. Asked to get my stuff out of my van and was told it would be mailed to me. Still haven't received everything. Probably won't. I hate the company with a ducking passion, and I'm still considering contacting the labor board about some concerns I have with certain labor practices they had us doing. Story 21. I used to manage e-com at a retail store. It was technically my title, but I never did any management because I was only over like 3 people. Part of my job was to help set schedules, and my manager once told me that the best way to fire someone is to slowly take away their hours, so they have to look for another job. Her thinking was that by the time you fired them, they would have been actively searching by then. However, this was not always the case. Story 22. I was laid off from a small company. These are things that I noticed that were huge indicators that things were going south. Company cutting back on everything. Some examples. Cleaning services were reduced to once a month. We were forced to clean the place ourselves, switching to a cheaper but worse phone service. No more free coffee. Items and tools that need repairing but are not. Upper management coming by extremely often and holding an insane amount of meetings. Before crap went down, these guys would barely show up. They didn't work there, per se. They were the owners. Secret meetings held by middle management. We would all usually come in at around 8:30 a.m., but one day the 3 managers came in at 9:50 at the very same time. It was so obvious they just had a meeting somewhere else. One of these managers was also laid off, and he mentioned to me that they were already discussing in that meeting who to lay off. Management proposed cutting down to a 4-day work week and 20% salary cut, but retracted its decision shortly after we all agreed to it. And for me, work was just off. I was definitely doing stuff, but it seemed it was just for the sake of keeping busy. We felt that we were going nowhere. Bottom line, if you think something is off, then it probably is. Polish up your resume and apply for jobs. Try your best to not burn bridges so that you can get your references and letters of recommendation. No matter how awesome the company is, don't get attached to it. If they have to lay you off, they won't think twice. Story 23. Assuming you're in an office, suddenly being left out of meetings or not being assigned to projects or finding your workload a lot lighter are all signs you're not going to be working there much longer. Also, if you're asked to show a coworker, or worse, a new hire, how to do a major component of your job, you can be sure your last day is coming up soon. If you're not in an office, say retail, factory, food service, or labor, suddenly losing your overtime, being scheduled for fewer and fewer hours, or not being called in, all indicate you're either about to be replaced or let go. And it probably goes without saying, but if your boss supervisor has suddenly started writing you up for any and all infraction, or has assigned someone to review your work, that's pretty clear evidence they're looking to get rid of you. Story 24. I had an EAE, executive assistant, who was not performing, had not adapted to the work environment and her peers. She had come from a different industry and had only been there 6 weeks. I sat with her and had an open discussion as to why and if she felt as though she could improve. She was honest and said she didn't think it was the right role for her, nor the suitable environment. I knew that she had some rather serious medical issues and was undergoing tests, which were quite expensive, so I agreed with her to allow her to stay in her role until the week prior to her probation period so she could A, continue to earn money to pay for her medical invoices, and B, look for alternative work. She stepped up and did a really great job of her remaining time, however still wanted to leave, and it was very amicable. She was actually a really lovely lady who took a role, got herself into a situation that wasn't suitable, and was honest about it. I'd rather deal with those circumstances every day than someone who's an a-hole and being destructive of their personal brand. Sometimes you just have to treat people like humans. It's not hard. Yes, I had the authority to enter into this agreement with her, and yes, it was discussed and agreed by the company. Story 25. I'm a sales manager. So for me, it's very simple. Every day I give you your monthly status so far. From this, you can tell whether you're a net profit or a net loss for the company. If you're a net loss without clear, demonstrable progress towards becoming a net profit, you're going to lose your job soon. I know that sounds kind of brutal, but I like it, and the same applies to me. It's honest, and you never have to wonder. You're either profitable or you're not, and you can measure it down to the cent. I've yet to have to fire anyone for behavior or anything not related to simply not being profitable. So I couldn't tell you how to notice if you're being fired for other reasons. I did have one person who just refused to comprehend she was getting fired, though. She kept blaming everyone but herself for her poor results to the bitter end. Story 26. Not in HR, but people, including managers, sometimes drop hints. I was a contractor for a long time to start my career 42. We're running out of work for you to do, often directed at a group of people. Even if you are loaded and have a good pipeline set up, you are in danger. Even if it's illogical that you get laid off, you are in danger. If you are likely the highest costing person on the team, you are in even more danger, 42. Someone from HR has started to let his power go over his head towards a team, often towards contractors, 42. If a member of another team starts educating themselves on something related to your skill set, 42. Don't go out and buy an expensive car, was one. However, this one was pretty much a direct telling that some layoffs were coming, 42. Your lead manager stops listening to your input if you were able to talk to him before. Whether or not this is an indication of getting laid off, it's time to start sending out resumes. This is especially true if they hire someone and show great favoritism towards the new guy, 42. Permanent employees are being replaced by contractors. The better companies will just tell you up front and not drop hints. Story 27. If you're working in a healthy organization, your manager should have clear expectations for you, and if you haven't been meeting them, then it should have been communicated to you clearly and specifically, at least a couple of times. If you're genuinely worried about being let go out of the blue, then either you work in a screwed up place or possibly your company is having financial issues. I know that in some industries, while locations, it's harder to get a new job than others, but in either of the cases I mentioned, it's probably good in the long run for you to be out of there. Story 28. Have any of you HR types ever seen some of these sketchier tactics backfire? Like the employee gets wise, it ends up in court, and the employee has his own meticulous list of wrongdoing by the employer? I remember an old crapbag manager that tried to pounce on a pretty savvy employee once. The second the employee came in, the manager directed him to an office with a witness and confronted him with a scathing counseling statement, which was packed with lies. Instead of being shocked, signing it, and allowing the manager's plan to proceed, he used company policy to his advantage. He noted on the counseling statement that he disagreed and forced the manager to sit there for an hour while he wrote a meticulous 4-page rebuttal that destroyed every single assertion. He listed his evidence, made logical points, and named witnesses who could dispute the claims, including the witness to this counseling. It was a disaster for the manager. When the employee didn't simply bend the knee for him, the workplace got extremely hostile and tense. Eventually, the bigwigs came down, interviewed us, and removed the guy from a managerial position. Story 29. At the fast food restaurant I work at, there's an older gentleman that's been working there at least 9 years prior to my arrival last year. While he was apparently one of the fastest workers when he first got there, he is now elderly and only works once a week for a few hours cleaning the dining area. When I arrived, I was one of the few bilingual workers, so whenever the head manager wanted to tell him something, he asked me to translate because it was easier. 2 days ago, he told me to let him know that he was now on call for this Saturday, as opposed to having a set time on the schedule like usual. Saturdays are our busiest days, so almost anyone that is available to work Saturdays works. I'm almost certain that his time here is now coming to an end, and I could tell he could too from the face he made when I told him what on-call meant. Story 30. I'm reminded of the "Doesn't she look tired?" episode of Doctor Who. The way I knew things were circling the drain was when my higher-ups began generating concern that I wasn't feeling well or was somehow disgruntled. I'd keep getting called in and kindly interrogated about if I was feeling okay and what could they do to make things easier for me. This was all under the guise of, we're all family here and we care. It wasn't until several recurrences of this little chat that I began to realize they were trying to build a case for subpar performance and burnout by using my own words as the testimony. I started responding to these concerned inquiries with cheery smiles and "everything's so great, thanks," in a kind of kiddie show announcer voice. When they realized I wasn't helping them dig my own grave, they had their superior fire me over the phone right before a massive blizzard hit in Noai. I mean, on the bright side, I didn't have to drive in a blizzard.